Sorry about that. We got interrupted, Mike. I'm here today discussing bees and colony collapse disorder with Mike Hansen with the Michigan Department of Agriculture and Rural Development. My name is Bob Andorfer. For some reason, my iPhone decided it was time to reboot. And so, right in the middle of that. So we will keep, hopefully you can join us. We'll kind of backtrack just a little bit here. I don't want to spend a lot of time discussing what we started, but we didn't get going too far. So you were discussing, we had a report last week from Bloomberg talking about colony collapse disorder and that bees were bouncing back. And you mentioned that we started seeing this just, a little over 10 years ago, right? We started, they coined the term and
well, that's correct, Bob. About 2006, the term colony collapse disorder received a lot of media attention, became a very public thing. You got to step back to the 1980s when both two parasitic mites, the varroa mite and the tracheomite, first entered North America. And shortly after that, in Michigan, we saw bee operations lose 80-90% of their colonies from those parasitic mites. It didn't create the media attention at that point, but it caused a changeover in beekeeping, who's keeping bees in the state. And about that time, Michigan beekeepers realized if they're going to overwinter a large number of bees and have them ready for apple pollination this spring, they're going to have to do it in the south. So Michigan became a migratory state. The largest percentage of our bees actually leave the state in the fall, go to the south, and come back in time for pollination in the spring. So the dynamics of beekeeping in Michigan changed dramatically because of these parasitic mites. In 2006, the colony collapse disorder was coined after beekeepers had large amounts of adult bees die off. And with brood, there wasn't a reason for the bees to abscond, reason for them to leave, but they just came up missing. And the term got put into place. A lot of research dollars went into that. After about 5 years of research, there was a meeting in Alexandria, Virginia, which included researchers and government officials and beekeeping industry professionals. And they determined there are really six major causes that are attributing to this. Nutrition, farming road to road, and not having enough wildflowers. Pesticides, of course, will always play a role because insecticides, of course, kill insects, and that's their job. And where you have the interaction, you'll lose bees from that. You'll always have things such as the cold weather, the hot weather, and forgive me, I just don't have all those things at the top of my head. But there were six interconnecting things. No one was the major. All were important. They worked together synergistically. And create a lot of problems. Parasites like the mites, disease, quite a bit of bee disease, that type of thing.
But there's always been external forces that impact beehives. It's just we notice kind of a real kick in the numbers, right?
Right, and bees well managed will do well for us, but we pretty much lost our wild bees after the mites came in the late 1980s, early 1990s. So now if we're going to have honeybees, they're predominantly managed colonies where beekeepers have to watch for populations of disease, population mites, take action. And if they don't, they're out of business. And if we don't have those people taking care of bees, we don't have honeybees for pollination. Very critical.
Yeah. Which kind of leads into my next question, which is, can you explain to people how bees really are an integral part of Michigan agriculture?
Bob, they're critical. We raise 300 crops in Michigan. Probably 30-40% of them rely on honeybee pollination or pollination from other types of bees, bumblebees, blue-faced bees, horn-faced bees, what have you. Different pollinators and wild insects that also do pollination. They're critical to our pollination. We're a major producer of pickles, blueberries, apples, cherries. They all require honeybees to pollinate. So we have probably 170,000 colonies in the summer. Most of those leave the state and they come back strong and ready to do pollination in the spring. Now, we haven't registered beekeepers since 1993. We don't have exact numbers, but we know how many colonies are coming back from, say, a state like Florida. That tells us. We know how many colonies we certified to go to Georgia and are returning. So we have a pretty good handle, but I can only say that it's the best guess of the seat of the pants you can have.
Right.
Don't want to give any official numbers because there are no official numbers.
Right. And how many people would you estimate are involved professionally in beekeeping in Michigan?
Bob, I think our Michigan Commercial Beekeepers Group will tell you there's close to 100 families that are commercial beekeepers in the state of Michigan. That is, the family makes their livelihood from beekeeping. We have a large number of serious sideliner type beekeepers, people with 50 to 500 colonies that have a second job. The bees may be their second job.
Right.
And some estimates are there could be as many as 10,000 beekeepers overall when you consider the individuals who put a hive in their backyard just to be helpful for the bee population. That seems to be a theme lately. I wanted to do the right thing, so I put bees out.
Right. Good. So let's circle back now. Hopefully people have had a chance to kind of catch back up to us and be listening to this. But the Bloomberg Report, so the big headline last week was bee colonies bouncing back. I read a little bit of it and sent it to you, and while everybody would agree that that's a good thing, it's not so simple as just saying the crisis is over.
Well, no, it's not. The colony collapse disorder argument may be over, but there's a number of other issues going on. Around World War II, we had over 6 million colonies of honeybees statistically in the United States. That dropped down to about 2.5 million a few years ago. And recently, if you looked at the Bloomberg Report, there's a little report back to National Ag Statistics, and they point out that they do quarterly counting. And at one point in the last year, they had as high as 3.1, 3.2 million colonies of bees in the U.S. So the average annual is now up to about 2.8 million colonies of honeybees. And that fluctuates drastically. We still are losing 35% a year. Colonies are dying off, according to the Bee Informed Partnership, great website, beinformed.org, just spelled just the way it sounds. Great data collected from beekeepers from all over the country and used in very interesting ways to come up with some good ideas as to what's happening. But bee numbers fluctuate. They go up and down, so we deal with these averages. It was interesting to me when you look at the NAS report that Bloomberg was quoting. They showed Michigan as having 25,000 colonies of bees in January. Well, that may be correct, but come June, we're back up to about 175,000. They listed North Dakota with about 80,000. In the summer, they register 680,000 colonies of honeybees in North Dakota.
Right.
So a lot of those bees were in California, at the time when the statistics, they may have been reported there. And at the time when Bee Informed Partnership does their survey, or NAS does theirs, our bees are in different places. So the numbers give you an idea of the distribution across the country, but they aren't exact. So we're seeing 3.1 million. That's what can be counted. So we know relatively we've moved up.
Right.
But Bob, people are still losing 35% of the bee colonies throughout the year. Last year it was 33% in that area. Michigan's losses, our own losses, actually went down quite a bit. A few years ago, we were close to 60% from the people who reported, which were predominantly backyard beekeepers, because at that time our commercial beekeepers were not in the state. But our losses have gone down quite a bit. And I attribute a lot of that to a lot of the education that some of our professors, our people from Michigan State University, have been out in an extension way. Dr. Pett, Dr. Wang, Dr. Milbrath, Dr. Isaacs, great work. Pollinators at msu.edu is a great website. And that their extension agency has actually started working with 4 extension specialists across the state to help get things, information out to individuals. They have even attracted a tech transfer team from the Bee Informed Partnership to work in Michigan, work closely with commercial beekeepers. Very exciting things over at MSU right now.
Yeah, well, that's great. So for anybody just joining us, I'm talking to Mike Hansen, Michigan Department of Agriculture, the state apiarist, and we're talking bees today. This is all based on that Bloomberg report. So would you say that the author of that report got the story right, or is it still a little bit misleading in terms of trying to claim that CCD is done?
Well, to claim that CCD is done is to have people have hope that all the component parts are gone. And what researchers have come to understand is that colony collapse disorder now can generally be explained. Had a high population of varroa mites in the colonies. Mm-hmm. Beekeepers have a way that they can use 100 bees in a jar, put some powdered sugar in, and then shake it, and you can count the number of adult bees, a number of mites per 100 adult bees. And as long as they can keep those numbers down to only 1 or 2 mites per 100 adult bees, they're doing fine. We already have a term for when you get above that 3 threshold, because there's 6 times as many mites in the cell, and they call that dead bees walking. In other words, when you get past a certain point,
right,
you can put all the chemicals you want in there, you're probably not going to save that colony.
Right.
But beekeepers know they have to manage mites, and there's an arsenal of good products out there. Acids like hops beta acid. It's basically hops. The same things we use in beer.
Oh.
Bees,
Okay.
I don't know if they love it, but it's a tool that a beekeeper can use. There are some other chemicals that can be used to control mites, but beekeepers need to manage mite populations, or that's a big problem. The thing mites do is they kill bees directly, but they also transmit viruses. And if we get serious virus problems, we know the colony is going to go down. There are probably 8 or 10 major viruses in the U.S. Dwarfed wing virus just deforms the wings on the bees to the point they'll never fly. And if 50% of your adults can't fly, they can't forage, your colony's in trouble. So there are a number of things happening within the bee colony that we can say this colony died from a virus problem, where before you might have said, I'm not sure what happened, it's colony collapse. So we're renaming and understanding, and from that way we can address some of these problems.
Get a little more specific on the causes, then you can work on the solutions.
Then you can, then you can address that.
Yeah. Yeah. All right. Just wanted to pass along that if you have questions while we're doing this Facebook Live audio event, please add them to the comments section on Facebook Live here. Please like this broadcast as well. That will help get it out to as many people as possible. So let's go to a couple of questions that we got earlier. This one is from Lauria, Sabin. What insects are competitors or threats to bees, and what's the best practice to eliminate the threats?
Oh boy, that's an interesting question. If we were in Europe, there are some giant hornets that are direct threats to honeybees, and we don't want those hornets coming to the U.S. There are actually hornets that can, in numbers of 30 or 40 in a group, can enter a colony and can destroy an entire honey colony in a very short time, just ripping heads off bees, and then they rob out the honey and what have you. We're fortunate not to have that in the U.S. The biggest threat is the parasitic mites, the varroa mite and the tracheomite to bees. There's a small hive beetle that gets into the colony and creates some problems, especially in warmer climates where it can pupate in the soil and build up larger numbers. We see them in Michigan. It's not a big threat. When it comes to other things, when they get out in the flower beds and they're going for nectar, the research has shown that a healthy native pollinator population and honeybees together are more complementary, and they stimulate flowers to produce nectar, and they tend to work very well together for the benefit of all. I mean, they both compete for the same nectar, but they're promoting the crop.
Right.
And you're going to overall get better pollination. The honeybees will thrive, and so will the wild bees. So they tend to be complementary rather than negative. There are parasites, but when it comes into nature, they're very, very capable.
Yeah. Well, and that kind of makes me think, I know the department has gotten questions in the past about what to do if someone finds a beehive a homeowner finds a beehive where they don't expect it. And I think a lot of people's first reaction is, oh, I'm going to spray it, I'm going to kill it. But really what we would like them to do is what?
I'll tell you, most of the bee clubs in Michigan, and you can go to the Michigan Beekeepers website, michiganbees.org, or if you're in Southeast Michigan, the Southeastern Michigan Beekeepers Association. If you just Google the name, you'll come to their website. And within those sites, there are links to the bee clubs across the state. Many of those clubs advertise that they have beekeepers that collect swarms. Mm-hmm. In Southeast Michigan, that group has actually broken down by county, and they actually have beekeepers said, I'll collect the swarm that's hanging in the tree, and others will actually do removals from buildings.
Wow.
So you want to talk to the person about their skills and what have you. If you have something in a building, it can be very damaging to a building. There's a contractor in Grand Rapids who's both a building contractor and a bee removal specialist. So he'll do the whole job for you.
Right.
If you get in other parts of the state, the beekeeper knows how to remove the bees, but you're going to have a carpenter to fix it. But you don't want to leave that mess in your wall.
Yeah.
What have you. So getting a hold of a beekeeper to come collect the swarm is the best thing to do. They have an opportunity to address it. They're going to do a better job of cleaning up the pile. And quite frankly, running around with some kind of chemical to try to kill them is kind of a haphazard way to get yourself into trouble with yourself and anybody who loves you.
Right, but they can appear fairly suddenly, right? From what reports I've seen, I mean, you could go out one day and not have anything, and the next day.
Well, the swarming is nature's way of multiplying bee colonies, and a beekeeper will add honey supers. They'll make room for bees in their colony in order to try to prevent swarming. But if they miss that time when the bees are going to swarm, they'll swarm, and you'll have swarms coming off all the time. And it's important. At least in Michigan, we can collect those colonies. In Florida, no. In Florida, in southern part of Florida, they have an Africanized bees.
Right.
You're not allowed to collect the swarm because chances are it is going to be an Africanized colony unless you knew it came out of a Manny's colony.
Right.
If you saw it happen. So depending on where you're at, you can do that. We're pretty safe here in Michigan.
Okay. Another question that we got from Facebook from Trudy says, we're finding dead bees around water sources in a yard. They seem to go in a little water and die. Does anything just jump out at you, or what would you suggest?
Well, there's a couple things that happen. One for sure is that bees are covered with hair, and if they get wet, they get weighed down, they can't move. So even when beekeepers put out, say, corn syrup for them to feed on, they'll stick a bale of hay in there so that the bees can crawl on the edge of the hay to drink off the edge of the water.
Okay.
So if they go to your pond, they're trying to hover and something splashes or something, they get wet. They get wet and makes them too heavy to fly, and they'll pass away. It is possible, if you have, I'm not sure if chlorinated water is an issue. I don't think so. Okay. Some people have saltwater pools. Bees love salt water. It's good advertisement for good old chlorine and bromine here. Because bees love salt water. They'll flock around a saltwater situation. But also remember that the oldest bees in the colonies are the ones doing the foraging. They go through. They're when they're born, they usually become nurse bees. They work inside the colony, and it's during those last 2 weeks of their life. And a bee in the summer only lives about 30 days.
Oh, didn't know that.
Yeah,
wow.
They have lived longer through the winter, but only so that last week or so is spent collecting water for cooling the colony. And collecting nectar to feed the colony, and they're literally beating their wings off. And old bees die in the field quite often. So you got the combination of getting wet, combination of this. You're going to see some of that.
Okay. Another question we have from Mike Cheney: are mason bees wild in Michigan? If so, can I put out homes to house them through the winter?
Mason bees are.
What are mason bees? What are mason bees? First of all, how are they different from?
Well, a mason bee is a solitary insect. It's not a honey bee. It's a different type of well, I just call them bees.
Yeah.
Forgive me the term. I don't think it's a wasp. It's a pollinating insect. And mason bees and leafcutter bees and a whole group of native pollinators are very active in Michigan, and actually, quite a few people have put out, it looks like a little birdhouse, but it's just filled with these tubes.
Oh, okay.
And that's a perfect habitat for a mason bee to lay its eggs. Mason bee will use a little dab of nectar and some pollen and lay an egg on there and then wall that off. And they'll make a group of these in that tube, and then they come out the next spring. A mason bee and a number of their relatives are only adults for a short time in the summer. They live the rest of the year in that tube. So putting those out is fine. They actually are firms that sell mason bees, so you can get some to put in your area, but then you'll have to have the tubes if you want them to keep from year to year.
Right.
It mimics the reeds, where the reeds and whatever they would normally do that in nature.
Okay. Good. Okay, so the answer is yes. And then we also have a question from Naomi. First year here, best way to overwinter hives for northern Michigan.
Naomi, I'm going to tell you, I'm the regulator, not the beekeeper.
Okay.
The MichiganBees.org website is the Michigan Beekeepers website. Within that, you're going to find a pretty good list of all the bee clubs in the state of Michigan. I recommend people who want to have bees even join a club before they get their bees to start learning who the beekeepers are in your area, what practices work best for them, where you might be able to get a piece of equipment in a hurry if you needed it, because people are pretty good at sharing once they get into these groups. We have some very dynamic and high quality clubs in the state, but really if you're using a good bee colony and it's sealed well and offers proper ventilation so you have air movement through the winter, you should be able to overwinter in most of Michigan. In the UP, you might wrap your bees, a practice used a lot by Canadian beekeepers to keep them insulated so they don't get too cold in a sudden cold. But the biggest thing is having good air movement in that colony. The bees will keep themselves warm in a cluster in the winter, but if you don't have good air movement, you get moisture in there and you'll freeze your bees because the moisture gets on them and that's what freezes them. And dry air at any temperature is easier to maintain their cluster. Yeah.
And I think you mentioned a little bit earlier, just wanted to touch on it again, we're seeing a lot of backyard beekeepers, the growth in that over the last few years. Any recommendations for somebody who's saying, gee, I'd like to get started? What would be your recommendation?
Well, again, I join a local club and get involved and learn how the other beekeepers in the area are doing it. We do have some commercial bee houses in the state, and by that I mean businesses that sell beekeeping equipment. I mean, you can go to a family farm and home and buy all your equipment, or you can get a hold of Chris Barnes down at Dadant in Albion, and he's got a whole nationwide company behind him with equipment and information and books. The Wickwast Press, Larry Connor, just a tremendous resource out of the Kalamazoo area, Climax, Michigan. Larry just specializes in honeybee books. That's his market. He goes to shows. He does educational programs, and there's resources in Michigan that are pretty tremendous. If you go to the pollinators.msu.edu, the pollinator page at Michigan State University that Dr. Megan Milbrath keeps up, a lot of good resources for beginning beekeepers as well. So you just want to research a lot of those avenues. Join a local club. The Michigan Beekeepers has a tremendous beginner track at their spring show in usually the first second weekend in March at Ag Natural Resources Week at Michigan State. Attend that and go through the beginner track, and they'll take you right through the cycle of keeping bees in the state.
Great. And kind of we're getting toward the end of our time here. Just hearing from Darlene Bowers, who is saying, I hope this is more than a one-year bump. I love to see the bees in our woods pollinate the wildflowers in our garden. Keeping fingers crossed for now. I think that speaks for everybody. But we're seeing a positive trend.
Well, I think one of the reasons we're seeing a positive trend is we're not losing as many bees, and beekeepers, especially our commercial ones, are not having to put as many resources in getting back to the numbers they had last year, but are actually able to expand operations a bit. So that's truly helping. Until there's some sort of a biocontrol, so to speak, to take care of the parasitic mites, I don't think we'll see honeybees in large numbers in the wild. If you have mites, you're just not going to have bees healthy enough to last through our winter. It's too long of a period of time. Right. That's why beekeepers have to be very careful to manage their mites in August, so they have healthy bees going into the winter. There's a cycle to management that has to be taken into account. And I'm excited for the beekeepers. I'm excited that we have people wanting to keep bees. There's always going to be interactions between people and their neighbors when you have bees. Right. Yeah. But if our commercial beekeepers can be successful, we have 300 crops in Michigan. We have a major agricultural state, and it's very important to us. It's going to allow a lot of other agricultural businesses to be successful. So they're key to managing our crops here.
Well, where can listeners go for more information about this? You mentioned a number of things. Is there something the department has going
Bob,
on?
The department has a website, michigan.gov/pollinator protection. In the last year, members from the department, Michigan State University, Michigan Farm Bureau, and commercial beekeepers have started to work on a pollinator protection plan for Michigan. It's really a plan to help farmers and beekeepers be discussing pesticide use to try to decrease the interface between I got to use chemicals, but my bees are here, and try to help people communicate a little bit more. It'll never be perfect, but if we can help people communicate, that's going to be there. That site also has links over to the websites at Michigan State University that have become very popular. Someone asked if there was a regular newsletter. I told them to go to the Pollinators at MSU site, and I got an email back 30 seconds later that says, "Thank you, I signed up." Yeah. And you can get updates of what's going on. There are a lot of resources out on the web to get information. Be Informed Partnership. Just excellent things that are happening that we did not have at our fingertips 10 years ago.
Great. Well, Mike, thank you very much for talking to me today. We've been discussing bees in Michigan with Mike Hansen from MDARD here. And if you're listening to this Facebook Live audio later and you think of a question, please put it in there. We will try to get to it. Thanks for joining us, Mike.
Have a good day.
Thanks.
Thank you, Bob.